Hey, Harry, thank you for coming in. My God, what a background, like KPMG, Blackstone, you're top CEO in the world, and sit on
CIO, not CEO,
or
CIO.
CIO. The fact you do all the work, right? So from a technology standpoint, you're amongst the best ever, and you're including in the CIO Hall of Fame and so on, and just endless. So just really happy to have you come in and just share some of your experiences.
Great. Well, Stephen, pleasure to be here. And, it's I've had a fantastic career and worked for, as you just noted, great organizations, great people, great leaders, and I've had great teams supporting me throughout my entire career. And it's just when I reflect on it, it's just been a lot of fun. Just been my entire career, a lot of fun. Lots of stress at times, but also lots of fun.
Well, Harry, you got this legendary status, and in fact, you're an icon, and now you're one of the fastest growing companies ever, leading their technology effort again. And there's got to be some milestones in your life, maybe two or three, that helped shape you to become this legend.
Oh, there's lots of great stories I can share. One of the one of the stories I love to share is when I was growing up in Ireland. So I was 12 years old when my father's factory burned to the ground, and my father ended up in hospital as a consequence of an accident the day after the fire. And so it was June 1967. And I used to get on my bike at about 7 o'clock in the morning, ride down to the hospital, see my father. He'd give me a to-do list. Then I would ride back to the factory grounds. I would talk to the employees. I would talk to the insurance companies. I would call equipment companies and construction companies. And at lunchtime, I would ride back down to the hospital on my bike, see my dad, ride back to the factory, and then ride back again at the end of the day before dinner. And I did that for almost 2 weeks until he was released from hospital. And so the factory was called J. Moseley before, and afterwards, after the reconstruction, it was called J. Moseley and Son. And I think that was a very, very early childhood training in terms of discipline, focus, don't panic, and just be sort of mindful of it. And, throughout my career, I've had great opportunities, whether it was Credit Suisse or Blackstone or KPMG. I remember in a couple of situations being challenged. I remember having a conversation with the president of the firm Blackstone, where I was challenged to sort of build a piece of technology in 6 months. And I remember him turning around to me saying, am I talking to Harry Moseley, or am I talking to, somebody who's impersonating him? And I looked at him and I go, Tony, I this is the real Harry Moseley. So if you don't mind, I'm going to excuse myself now, because I've only got 6 months, and every minute I spend sitting here is a minute lost. And so it's there's been a lot of sort of moments like that. I think it comes down, actually, Stephen, now that I'm thinking more about it, I've always been given the opportunity to stretch, get out. People have always pulled me out of my comfort zone. As an example, I remember back at UBS when I got promoted to managing director, which was circa 1996, 97, and I had to go to the Wolfsburg Training Center in outside of Lake Constance in Switzerland for 4 weeks. And in this training center, every Monday morning there was an assignment to the class, and the class was made up of a diverse group of people from around the world with different backgrounds and experiences and roles. And this week's this week's class exercise is establishing a new strategy for foreign exchange trading. And Harry Moseley will lead the exercise. And I'm like, didn't know there was another Harry Moseley in the room. And I put up my hand and I said, I'm sorry, I'm Harry Moseley. It's kind of like, I'm from technology of UBS in New York. And they said, yes, we know that. You're leading the exercise. And on Friday, you have to present it to members of the management committee and members of the board in front of the entire training facility. And I'm like, you must be joking. It's like, does anybody else have any questions besides Harry? Because if not, I'm going to excuse myself and let him take the floor. And then on Friday, I made the presentation to members of the management committee and the board about what the FX strategy should be for the firm globally, working with my team. And I think it's, sort of another thing that comes to mind, Stephen, and then I'll stop, is I think leadership is about supporting the team. When you wake up in the morning, what do you think about as a leader? You think about what are the obstacles, what are the speed bumps that are preventing your team from achieving success? And I think that if you can help your team achieve success, you are successful. And that's very much like our mantra at Zoom. We think of our clients as partners. We're all about our clients being successful. If they're successful, we believe we'll be successful.
So, that's just a fascinating background. And it's interesting you bring up, when you were very young, to the different, major positions you've held globally, driving change and transformation and being stretched and and being up to the challenge and more. But it's fascinating that you basically came out of retirement to get into Zoom. Now, can you just share a little bit about that story?
Absolutely. I announced my retirement Monday, December the 11th, 2017 from KPMG, and I came home. On Thursday, I was having lunch with some friends in Hoboken, New Jersey. My phone rang 3 times, and it was from a friend of mine in California. I said, sorry, what could be so urgent that you're calling me 3 times? He says, I need to talk to you. Fast forward 4 o'clock that afternoon, having a call with Zoom, and they said, we heard you retired. I go, yes. And we'd like you, we're looking for a global CIO. And I go, great, I know lots of them. And then he goes, well, we were thinking of you as our global CIO. And I go, hang on a second, didn't I just tell you I retired? And then the dialogue went on over the course of January, and I met Eric Yuan. And the fact is, Stephen, so why did I join? When I had retired? The reason I joined was principally that the need to collaborate locally, nationally, and globally, that's always been there. And we need to do it in steroids, and we need to do it in a seamless and frictionless way. And as an IT leader, we had tried to do that. We tried to do that with different technologies and stitching them together. To say that it didn't work would be a lie, but it didn't work well. When I listened to Eric and about his vision for Zoom to create a true seamless and frictionless collaboration platform for the planet, and I looked at the technology architecture at what he had built back then, and I had spoken to industry specialists that have been immersed in the UCaaS environment and communications environment for their entire career. I was convinced that of several things. 1, Zoom was going to be an absolute success. 2, I'd be working with some of the brightest people on the planet. 3, I'd have a lot of fun. And for me, if when you're working, if you're not having fun, then you really shouldn't do it, because you won't do it. You won't do the job well. That's a principle of mine. I'm very fortunate to be able to live by that principle. A lot of people can't, so I get that. It has been. It's proven out in every way. It's Zoom is successful. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm working with like amazing people. So what could be better?
Yeah, I can imagine what the day-to-day environment must be like when you go from something like 10 million engagements a day to what, over 300 million, maybe it's 400 million now. How do you manage that growth?
Yeah, with a talented team of people who are dedicated, who work tirelessly, because sort of to say that we predicted this sort of growth, we didn't. But managing to this sort of growth has been a big challenge, and the team has stood up well against that. The technology architecture has clearly, beyond any shadow of a doubt, proven itself, and it's unique because if you take in the U.S. as an example, we've got 3 data centers: East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast. And so if our East Coast data center early in the morning has a demand, high demand, it can borrow capacity from Denver and it can borrow capacity from California, and vice versa because as the sun goes west, things start acquiescing in the east, right? And so you can sort of balance the power of those data centers across. You get a little bit more latency, but with our proprietary QoS, that is seriously reduced, and so we are able to maintain our high performance standards. Our net promoter score is in the 70+ percentile, customer satisfaction in the high 90s, service levels at 4 nines. So it's really been rather astonishing and a real proof.
And I guess the reality too, and especially for those who are younger in the audience watching this, and they're thinking, well, I can work a 4-day week, but I know you don't work a 4-day week. What's your week like? Is it like 4 days or 6 days? Is it, 6-hour days or 12, 14-hour days as you leading this marvelous change and this digital transformation?
I think that, every week is different. When you think about people working in the office, let me talk about that. When you think about people working in the office, you get these unnatural breaks, right? If you and I are working in the same office, I could come by and, hey, Stephen, you want to pop out and grab a Starbucks? And you say, yes. That's an unnatural break. When we are working in this new environment, or this existing environment, because I wouldn't call it new, this is kind of like it's just what we're living through, but I don't think this is anyway normal, but it is our existing. You don't get those unnatural breaks. It's like, no one's going to knock at the door of my house and say, Harry, you want to go, take a walk down to the village and grab a cup of coffee? But my wife might, but unlikely, because she's busy doing the same thing I am. And so you don't get those unnatural breaks. So I've put a lot of sort of controls in place now for my day. So, and as Farshad and many others know, I mean, if I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do an interview with Sydney, or do a presentation to Tokyo, or be on a call 11 o'clock at night with India, or so things like that, I do it because, but then I schedule these breaks during the day so that I can actually, get out and take my coronavirus puppy for a walk around the block. Otherwise, he's going to make a mess in the office, and that's not going to be a good thing. But they are long days, but they're good days. They're really good days, because I fundamentally believe that Zoom is making a difference in this world. Somebody I know is the chief operating officer for a company that provides consultative services to eye surgeons. So think about that. You have a surgeon operating on an eyeball of a patient, and they put a 4K camera on the eyeball, and they have consultants join them over Zoom to provide guidance to the hands of the eye surgeon performing the operation. I think that's pretty cool. It's we're kind of like helping people see. When I think about a deployment that we did in Europe recently, where one of the employees came up to our trainer afterwards and said, "Thank you for changing my life." And the trainer goes, "How have I changed your life?" "I worked for this organization for 14 years. I've never been able to participate fully in a meeting until Zoom arrived because I have a hearing impairment. I can talk completely normally, but I can't hear very well. Not like hearing aid. I just can't interpret words. I can't interpret the sounds. But in a meeting now with Zoom, I can read what everybody is saying. So I can finally participate in a meeting as a leader. And so you have changed my life." So we help people here. And when I think about sort of Zoom as a purpose, as a company, we're helping people getting educated. We're helping governments run their countries. We're helping the economies in many countries around the world function in a variety of different industries. And we're helping people have some fun with yoga classes and church services on Sunday and bar mitzvahs. And the Queen of England had her birthday celebration on Zoom. I mean, and Zoom weddings and Zoom concerts and Zoom theater. It's like, you name it, it's been done on Zoom. So it's pretty cool.
It's interesting. You're describing this sort of landscape of engagement, and it's happening digitally. And, I think back to January of 2016, where the fourth industrial revolution was announced at the World Economic Forum. And then about a year and a half ago, Japan announced Society 5.0, which is this sort of transformation occurring around the world on the biological, digital, and physical. But in Society 5.0, they're saying it impacts everybody: culture, society, smart cities, and so on. And then you have this situation which is accelerating all of this, and you have these long-term goals of the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. But what you're seeing is this contraction happening, this massive digital transformation. And for example, in medicine, and I'm proposing it's going to stay. And so it's not a situation where it's temporary. We're just going to incorporate more of this digital experience because it's so immersive, it's instantaneous.
And it works.
5G.
And it works. And it really works. I mean, I read this article a couple of months back now, actually. Sorry, investment bankers. I'm sure you're familiar with investment bankers, which are, they like to be on a phone, only on a phone, or an in-person meeting. But with coronavirus, no in-person meetings, and they suddenly discovered video. And this article talked about these investment bankers they just discovered video, and they discovered how effective video is. And the quote was, "I will never fly," this was a New York banker, "I will never fly to London again for a one-day meeting."
Right.
You look at Goldman Sachs did a $2.9 billion stock offering for SoftBank, and they conducted the whole exercise without a single in-person meeting, all over Zoom. Pretty cool. And my last point is, I fundamentally believe that everybody is now a millennial. Millennials were very good about texting, chatting, messaging, using digital devices. They love video. The reason I say everybody's a millennial is because my father-in-law, 82 years old, Zooming with his grandchildren, Zooming with my wife, Zooming with his friends. That's how he's staying connected with the world, which prior to coronavirus, he wasn't a Zoomer, but now he Zooms all the time. So I think everybody's now a millennial.
So it'd be great to then get your viewpoint, because there's this compression happening because of digital transformation and this adoption rate really happening now instantaneous in the next 2 to 3 years rather than 10 years across government, industry, academia, and so on, and infiltrating and really boosting, empowering engagement for all of us, including consumers. So how do you see then, if you were to look a little bit into the future, 2 to 3 years into the future, what do you think, for example, the future work is going to look like in general?
And I agree completely with your perspective, irrespective of what my logo is and the company I work for. But I agree that a lot of what we're doing today is going to live into the future. I think, retail is going to change dramatically. Travel will change dramatically. which is all good from a carbon footprint perspective and sustainability. I think there's going to be some challenges in the collaboration areas. We spent the last 5 to 10 years creating these fabulous, cool, open offices with high ceilings and soft couches and collaboration spaces and people huddled up together. I don't think that's coming back. And so the notion of sort of collaboration as it was very effective. Collaboration in the virtual world is very effective. When we're having some people in the office, and the bid and offer on that is somewhere between 30 and 50%, and the balance of the people working from anywhere, not necessarily working from home, but working from anywhere. How do you collaborate in this hybrid model? I think that we're going to see some interesting developments in that space, and very excited about what that will bring. I think all the myths of sort of people working from anywhere have been broken. People said people can't be productive. Many of the clients I've spoken to over the last several months have, without a doubt and zero hesitancy, have stated that their employees are actually more productive in this environment than they were in the office. Not because they're working longer hours, but because they're able to focus. And they're happier too, because they're not having to spend 2 hours commuting to work. They'd be even happier if their kids could go back to school and continue to work from home. And employers won't be able to accommodate them in the offices anyway because of the necessity for social distancing. So I think that we're going to see this model continue. Last point is myths have been broken, and the fact is that people now understand that I can be agnostic about geography. Meaning, I don't need to hire that special person in New York City or in Boston or in London. I can hire this person wherever they are, and they can work from there effectively. And I think that's going to change how we recruit and how we build our organizations and how we work.
Harry, you're such in a perfect position of analyzing the ecosystem of technical innovation, because you've done so much in the past and you continue to do so now. What do you think are some of the areas that our audience needs to look at, that they need to embrace in terms of upcoming innovation? For example, maybe the acceleration more of artificial intelligence. I know a lot of companies have looked at it, but sometimes they're having difficulty integrating it into their different business units and so on. Do you see now a better use case for the adoption of that, or things like blockchain, maybe even quantum computing? I mean, based on your experience, what are some of the things that our audience should be looking at in terms of using within their businesses?
I think sort of notion of sort of artificial intelligence and blockchain and augmented reality and virtual reality and all of these other terms that of sort of quantum computing. I think that there's going to be. I think the way I would summarize it best, Stephen, is that that technology leadership has now been elevated in every organization. I have always maintained that every company, for years I've maintained this, that every company is a technology company, irrespective of what industry you're in. I remember, I think it was like 4 years ago, Dana Deasy, who was the CIO at JP Morgan, said, we're a technology company in financial services. When I was at KPMG, I used to say we're a technology company in professional services. But not every organization saw technology as enabling their companies to grow faster, better, smarter, increase the top line, reduce the bottom line. I think what we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months is technology leaders have been elevated to be part of the management committee. I hope they stay there, because technology leaders have the ability to understand the art of the possible. They also have the ability to understand how products are built, how processes are run, whether it's back office processes or front office processes. and as I just said, they understand the art of the possible. So leveraging things like AI and VR and AR and quantum computing to help the businesses go faster, drive better products, drive better margins. These are the leaders that can help every company become dramatically better.
One of the other trends I'm seeing amongst corporates, and I work a lot with CEOs and building communities or building programs for them. It's all donated, by the way, so there's no commercial interest. I'm just trying to make the world better. How about the ESG aspect? And some in the audience may not know what that means, the environmental, social, governance aspect, or a sustainable, positive impact to society. What are your views on that? And you think, I mean, I'm seeing an increase attention to that. Do you think that's going to stay and be part of every?
Absolutely. It's like, sort of, I mean, sort of, you look at the millennials, they care about communities, they care about the planet, they care about sustainability, they care about the environmental aspect of the company. I fundamentally think in many cases they care more about those things than sort of how much they're getting paid these days. It's like, looking at my own children, when they were, my two boys, when they graduated, they cared a lot about the company that they were going to work for, as did their classmates. They wanted to know what was the community, what were these companies giving back to their community, giving back to the planet? What was the political views of these companies? And they care all about these sort of aspects of the organization. When I graduated, I cared about how much I was going to get paid and where I was going to work, and that's the honest to God's truth. When you look at some of the movements that we've seen at some of the companies over the last several months, actually, I don't want to name any, but when you look at some of the movements at these companies and the employees voicing their opinions on which clients we should engage with, what sort of business we should be engaging in or not, as the case may be, I think that shows that they are going to be a driving force behind sustainability, the environment, the community, and people in general, which I think is a very healthy thing, quite honestly. Yep.
Well, it's amazing that you very much see that as a trend as well. I guess it sort of ties in with Larry at BlackRock for the last 3 years. We talked about companies have to have some kind of positive impact, and then he subsequently talked about this largest transfer of wealth from baby boomers to millennials, something like $24 trillion, and investment trends will change to social, environmental, governance issues. And then he re-upped that again with regard to climate action, but also in terms of managing the pandemic as well. So it's interesting that you feel personally that this is going to be a sustainable aspect of everybody, or at least businesses anyways out there.
Yeah, and I absolutely do. Yeah.
So any other sort of free form predictions you want to make where you see things going at all?
Well, I think that as we sort of go through the next 6 months, it's going to there's going to be lots of new challenges getting thrown at us. I don't know when we'll have a vaccine, and then once we do have a vaccine, having how's that vaccine, tested with other medications that people are taking, and what are the side effects? How long is all that going to take before the world really has a vaccine that can be taken by everybody? I think that's going to take a lot of time, and in advance of that, sort of companies, enterprises, or people, thinking about transit systems, thinking about how do I get to the office? Used to take the train, don't want to take the train. How is this going to affect hospitality in general, from planes and hotels, and how's the TSA line going to work in the US? I mean, you know, it's like these are just huge challenges. How are our kids going to get educated? You know, we read every day about, so we're going to do it this way, we're going to do it that way, we're going to do it the other way. I think my wife works in education. It's going to, you know, we have a lot of the only thing I can say is the following, is I fundamentally believe that there's going to be, whatever challenges we faced over the last 6 months, I believe we're going to have a whole host of new challenges over the next 6 months leading into 2021. I think that many of the practices that we've done are going to stick. Talked about location agnostic, you know, hiring people. It'll make it easier to acquire the skills. Yeah, those are kind of like a couple of my top of mind topics. And we're going to see great, and the other thing is, and I know we're going to see great technology innovation to help the world become a better place.
You know, it's interesting that you're mentioning that there's challenges, but the challenges actually also provide an opportunity when this world resets to even produce better practices. As you mentioned, now carbon footprints are going to go down because people aren't going to travel as much by plane. It's a positive thing in many aspects, right? Because
it's positive to a point. We had a bear walking around my neighborhood. I don't think that's and the reason was because there's less cars on the road. It's kind of like, you know, I don't know if I like a bear walking around my neighborhood. Sorry, just a slight interjection there. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting. I was just reading a research study indicating that the planet is actually vibrating less from human activity.
What's that? Sorry?
The planet is vibrating less from human because the human activity has dropped, right? So
yeah. No, and you know, it was fascinating. My wife and I went to we took a long weekend, and we went to an adult resort up in Massachusetts over the last few days, and it was interesting to see how they were wiping everything down several times a day. Like every time you got up from like lunch or something, it's like all the chairs were wiped down, the table wiped down, they wiped underneath the table, they wiped the legs of the table. And I'm like looking at this, I hope this stays, because everything is like super clean. It's nice. It's actually not a bad thing.
yeah, I mean, so those are really positive changes, right? In terms of ensuring our better health. And as I mentioned earlier about telemedicine and all of the aspects of using either 5G or robotic technology or cloud analytics and so on to provide better healthcare. Those are going to be permanent changes for the better, right? So
I think people have become nicer. I don't know if you've noticed this. I actually think people have become more polite. I think people have become more patient. It's, you know, my wife and I try to get a walk in every day with the dog, and you know, you're outside, you see strangers on the other side of the street, and you know, people say hello and they say hello back. It's, you know, one of the things I love the most is my office at home. I have a nice window out to the street, and I love when I see, you know, a parent or both parents with their kids riding bikes. I mean, it's it's like, you know, I was talking to the CEO of a financial services firm. He said, Harry, it's kind of like we're processing 7.5 times the volume we used to do when we all worked in the office, and now we're all working from home. Business is great. You know, I get up in the morning, I have dinner with my wife and my breakfast with my wife and my kids. I take a swim at lunchtime, and I have dinner with my wife and my kids. He says, I'm loving life. When we have our management meeting and they talk about when we're going back to the office, I don't say anything because I got nothing good to say about going back to the office. This is like I'm having, it's like, this is the best it's ever been. And he said, it's like, I thought things about my children before this started. I didn't know my children. And that was, I remember, I still get the shiver down my spine when I share this, because I have, it's like, you know, and it's so true. It's like, you know, because why? Because you're going 100 miles an hour. You're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get on that train, or get in the car at 7 to be in the office at 8. You're coming home after dinner at 10. Now it's like and it's, so it's, I find all this, there are, look, rather we didn't have COVID-19. Absolutely. too many people have been hurt by this, too many people have died. Anything greater than zero is too many in my book. On the other hand, one has to sort of look at the silver linings here, the silver linings being people, family, quality of life. The myths have gone. We have an opportunity. I think every company has an opportunity to improve the company for their employees, their customers, their clients, their shareholders in ways that previously would have taken years to do. I was talking to one of our clients a couple of days ago where they migrated, almost 200,000 people to work remotely over the course of 7 days using the Zoom platform. And he said, if you had said to me that we were going to do that in the course of a week, I would have told you were mad. But we had to do it and we got it done. And so I think that sort of from a leadership perspective, we're seeing that we can do things differently and we can be really effective at doing them differently.
It's interesting. I guess that ties in with over 180, prominent CEOs last year in the fall, and before the COVID situation, indicating that you got to prioritize not just on shareholder value, but really value across all the different stakeholders and communities. And then that was endorsed earlier this year by European CEOs, and and you've seen that spread throughout the investment community. So really, I think goes back to your motto. You have this happy aspect in your motto, right?
It's very true, and it's like it's like what I said earlier. It's like we think of our customers as partners, and all we want is our partners to be successful, because if they're successful, then by default we'll be successful. Yeah.
We're down to our last closing couple of questions, and you are a legend, remarkable leadership globally amongst the best companies in the world. So can you distill some lessons that you can give to the audience that propelled your career, that people should be aware of, where they're thinking, I want to get to the same level as Harry? How did he do it? Well, what kind of advice can you give to the audience?
Yeah, there's several. The first is focus on your team. Make sure your team have the necessary resources to overcome any of their challenges. As a leader, your job is to make them successful. So I think that's one. Two is, as an individual, you will encounter challenges. And the problem with that is that many people, and I remember this much earlier in my career, I had a big problem and went to my boss with the problem, shared the problem with him, and then he just sat there looking at me. And I go, Paul, what should we do about the problem? He says, what are you going to do about the problem? And I said, well, I don't know what to do with this problem. And he said, and he got up from his desk like this, and he was leaning down on me, and he says, that's the number one problem. And I go, what? He said, you don't have a solution. He says, you never, ever go to your boss with a problem unless you have a solution. Doesn't matter how crazy it is, but it demonstrates to your superior that you identified the problem, you understood the root cause, and you've got a solution. And he may throw that solution right out the door and say, okay, that could work, but here's a better one. It shows that you at least have taken the time to analyze it and come up with a solution, which shows that. I think you need to, sort of have a plan and be committed to the plan. And I think you should never ask someone to do something you're not prepared to do yourself. I remember when Blackstone was going public in June of 2007, and it was the evening before the bankers come in to price the equity, and I went out for dinner with my wife, and we were in a car going home, and I said, let's just stop at the office. I want to see how the boys are getting on in the boardroom. That was about 9:30 at night. And so I go to the boardroom, and the boardroom's a mess. the guys are, working hard, and I could see this is going to be several hours. So I just called my wife in the car. I said, take the car home. I need to help the guys here, and I'll take another car home in a couple of hours. And I literally took off my tie, took off my jacket, rolled up my shirt sleeves, and got under the table with a screwdriver. And we were all done at about 11:30 at night, and everybody went home. And I think, you have to be there for your team. You have, it's I fundamentally believe that I am on their team. I always say that I am proud to be on your team. And I fundamentally believe that as individuals, we can do great things, but when you have a great team, you can do amazing things. So,
I mean, I guess what you're saying then is, as a team, it's force multipliers where you can go 1 + 1 + 1 is not 3, it's 111, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Not sure it's that much, but it is. It has that multiplier. And you got to have your back. You got to have people's back, and you got to cover for them, and you got to treat them with dignity and with respect. Yeah. So,
there's a young audience who also listens to my interviews as well. And what do you see how the skills have shifted? So what are the ideal skill set to have now and next year and the year after?
I think that, the world is becoming dramatically more technological. And I remember talking to the professor of engineering at, I think it was Washington University several years ago. And he said, one of the fascinating things I see, Harry, is that irrespective of the majors that our students are taking, many of them are taking computer science courses, technology courses, data science courses. And the reason that they're doing this is because when these young adults graduate university, they want to have technology skills, because every organization is looking for people to having some degree, is not degree as a qualification, but having some comfort with technology, I think, is important. Being able to sort of take a set of data, analyze the data. I think data analysis is really important. I think problem solving is super important. I think presentation skills are important. I think that one of the most important things for leaders today is having EIQ, emotional intelligence, being able to understand people's emotions, being able to, and that's why, at Zoom we call a video is the new voice, because if I can see you, I can hear you. And if I say something that makes you happy, you naturally smile. You can't do that on a regular phone call. You can't interpret someone's expression. You can't interpret someone's emotion. So I think emotional intelligence is super important. And I think it's also important to have some balance in one's life. There's nothing wrong with working hard and playing hard. So I think that just to work all the time is not a healthy thing. I think the brain can get scrambled after a while, and allowing the brain cells to sort of realign themselves is super important.
It's interesting, though. That's such a great foundation for the young people in the audience, and you exhibit also on top of that grit, this perseverance and passion, and you'll stay at problems and create opportunities out of them as well. And you're entrepreneurial, very much so, and you definitely are agile in your day-to-day work. So, that was the last question. I really thank you for coming in and just sharing your marvelous experiences with the audience.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Delightful to meet you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for hosting me this afternoon. And always happy to sort of help you, help others. I have a phrase that I use a lot, which is no ask is too big or too small. The only thing is, if you don't ask, nothing's going to happen. If you don't have the conversation, nothing's going to happen. It doesn't happen by osmosis as much as we'd like it to.
What a great thought. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.